The wave hit with no warning. One moment the deck tilted under Tami Oldham's feet as she fought to secure a line, and the next she heard a roar like a freight train tearing through steel. The sky disappeared behind a wall of water that rose higher than the mast. She didn't even have time to yell for Richard before it slammed into the boat. Everything went weightless, then violent. The vessel rolled hard, tossed like a toy as the hurricane spun around them. When Tami regained consciousness, she was flat on the cabin floor, soaked, bleeding, and unable to hear anything except the ringing in her ears. The world had gone silent. Richard was gone. Hours earlier, they had been sailing the Hazana across the Pacific, delivering the yacht from Tahiti to San Diego. Tami was 23, experienced enough to handle long passages, and Richard was older, confident, and steady. They had planned a predictable route. Fair weather, calm seas, nothing unusual for the season. But Hurricane Raymond formed fast and tracked north, swallowing their path. They tried to outrun it, then to go around it, but the storm grew faster than any forecast predicted. By the time they realized how close it was, the wind was already shredding the horizon. Tami pieced the moments before the impact together slowly as she forced herself upright in the ruined cabin. The storm had passed with terrifying speed, leaving behind heaving swells and debris scattered everywhere. The mast was gone. Water poured in through shattered panels. She tried calling Richard's name, but the only answer was the groan of the damaged hull. When she climbed to the deck, she saw the truth. The cabin top was crushed. The rigging was ripped away. And where Richard had been clipped in seconds before the wave hit, there was nothing but frayed line. She searched until exhaustion blurred her vision, scanning the swells for any sign of him. He had been thrown overboard, swept into a storm no one could survive. Shock kept her moving. She returned to the cabin and forced herself to focus on what was left, what she could salvage, what she could repair. The radio was destroyed. The navigation instruments were gone. The sailboat that had once felt alive under the wind now drifted helplessly. She fought back panic as she tested the engine and found it dead. She knew they had been pushed far off course, but she had no idea how far or in what direction. With no mast and no engine, the Pacific had turned into a featureless expanse that threatened to swallow her without even noticing. Tami found a sextant in the wreckage, dented but usable. She had studied navigation, but she had never needed to rely on it this fully. She climbed into the cockpit and steadied herself against the rolling hull as she took rough readings, trying to calculate her position by the sun. Her hands shook. The results were messy, but they gave her something to cling to, a guess at her location, somewhere between the Marquesas and Hawaii, alone on drifting fiberglass with limited water and food. Survival became a routine carved out of fear and determination. She pumped water from the flooded cabin each morning, keeping the boat afloat by sheer force of will. She rationed canned goods, eating only the minimum she needed to stay conscious. She rigged a makeshift sail from a broken spinnaker pole and spare cloth, trying to coax the vessel in any direction that wasn't backward. Each day brought new problems, a leaking hull, failing batteries, bruises that deepened instead of healing. She grew thinner, weaker, and more sunburned as the days blended together. She spoke to Richard as she worked, sometimes out loud, sometimes only in her head. She replayed the last time she had seen him, the way he had smiled through the storm and told her they would push through it together. She refused to let that last moment become a dividing line between life and death. She used it to stay focused, to stay alive long enough to reach land or a shipping lane or anything that meant rescue. Navigation became her lifeline. Each noon, she took another reading, revised her course, and corrected for drift. She aimed for Hawaii, knowing it was the closest landmass she had a realistic chance of reaching. The ocean mocked her progress. Currents pushed her off course. Winds shifted unpredictably, and her makeshift sail tore more each week. But she kept adjusting, kept calculating, kept fighting. She refused to surrender to the vast emptiness around her. By the third week, dehydration clawed at her. Her lips cracked, her vision tunneled. The sun turned her skin raw. She caught rainwater when she could, holding out containers during brief showers. Some days, she collected enough to drink. Other days, she had nothing. She began hallucinating, hearing Richard call her name, seeing land that vanished when she blinked. Even then, she forced herself back to the sextant, back to the calculations that anchored her to reality. The Hazana drifted into calmer waters as she pushed into the fourth week. The ocean stopped feeling like a predator and became something quieter, indifferent, but no longer hostile. She sensed she was closing in on her target when she noticed subtle shifts in the swell, patterns that hinted at distant shores. She climbed to the deck at sunrise each morning, scanning the horizon for the faintest line of green. On the 41st day, she saw it. At first, it looked like another hallucination, a pale smear where the sky met the water. She blinked repeatedly and steadied herself against the mast stump. The shape didn't disappear. It sharpened. It grew. It became the unmistakable outline of land rising from the ocean. She cried without sound, overwhelmed by the sight. She adjusted her scrap of sail, angling the boat toward the faint coastline, terrified she would drift past it before reaching help. Hours later, she passed close enough for someone on shore to see her. A small boat came out to meet her, its crew shouting as they approached the weather-beaten vessel. Tami could barely answer. She collapsed as they pulled her aboard, her body finally yielding to exhaustion after more than a month of survival driven by instinct, discipline, and raw determination. She learned later that she had navigated more than 1,000 miles with a damaged sextant, a torn sail, and almost no supplies. Every decision she made had carried her forward inch by inch, toward the one direction that didn't end in silence. She had taken the Pacific's worst blow and risen again, refusing to let the hurricane decide her fate. What she endured on that ocean became a story of relentless will shaped by loss, isolation, and the thin boundary between survival and despair. Even after rescue, the memory of those weeks stayed with her. The nights spent drifting under cold stars, the sound of the wind through the broken rigging, the empty space where Richard should have been. The ocean had stripped her life to its core, but it had also carried her to safety when she refused to stop fighting. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.